Your company spent 3 years migrating to the cloud. Multi-million-dollar commitments were made to AWS, and you were able to close 2 data centers. Mission accomplished. Then finance asks, hey, we're spending $2 million a year in the cloud. What are we getting for that? Suddenly, you're looking at workloads that made sense to migrate in 2021, but make 0 sense running there today. Small regional applications costing more per month than 3 years of on-prem infrastructure would have. The cloud versus on-prem debate? It's dead. Today's question is, which workloads belong where based on actual value delivery? Not historical momentum or, God forbid, vendor commitments. I'm Rob Boyd, and this is Priority 4 from Worldwide Technology's Strategic IT Value Creation Research, Strategic Workload Placement, and Infrastructure Optimization. Well, this sits at Priority 4 deliberately, because optimizing workload placement requires the visibility from Priority 1, the strategic partnerships from Priority 2, and the financial governance from Priority 3. Without those capabilities, you're making infrastructure bets blind. Well, I talked with Jeff Weeks and Devang Soni from Worldwide Technology experts who help organizations figure out where workloads actually belong. And they both pointed to the same pattern immediately.
We have seen sort of this transition to public cloud, and clients are sometimes being pushed to move their workloads at a very fast pace to public cloud, right? And in that journey, they may or may not have really ideally identified, does this workload belong in the public cloud, or should this workload be on-prem? Everybody was really running after, how do we drive our consumption that we have signed up with the CSPs out there? And in that journey, that was this big push, fast push to move workloads over to public cloud. I think the workloads that belong there have been there. There's probably some few workloads that may have not been that shouldn't belong in there are there as well. But I think clients, as they are operating in cloud now for the last 5+ years, are starting to ask themselves a question: does every workload that we have ideally go in the cloud?
That a lot of our clients, they didn't answer one important question when they started to the cloud, and that was, why are we going there? What's the real benefit? Sometimes they ran because it was the thing to do. Maybe it's a little bit of peer pressure. Others, it was a technical tool and it was cool. And so everybody wanted to go to the cloud. Now they're getting out of, maybe they've been running there for a little while and they're kind of getting used to the costs and they're understanding that. And the natural questions, this technology or any other, is what's the real value? What am I getting out of this? Especially as the FinOps has really started to take root and finance is coming back in and going, we're spending X amount of money. What are we getting for it?
What changed isn't just that cloud got expensive. What changed is maturity. Organizations shifting from cloud as a migration destination to infrastructure as a portfolio of placement options. Devang explained what that actually looks like when you start asking the right questions.
That's when you start to think about, okay, what are some of the characteristics that you would define that would allow you to put a workload in public cloud versus on-prem? What sort of technologies should these workloads belong in? Considering cost as one of the major attributes or drivers in the mix, understanding your application characteristics, meaning, is my application that chatty? How much does it need to come back on-prem to talk to other applications? Does my application have PCI, PII, PHI data that ideally we shouldn't put it in some sort of public cloud today because of governance, regulatory requirements, compliance issues? If you are a banking client, certain workloads ideally belong in public cloud, but certain with PCI, PII data likely wouldn't.
Application chattiness, compliance requirements, data sovereignty. Well, these concerns existed during the initial migrations. They just got steamrolled by urgency. What do mature organizations do? Well, they're making a more fundamental shift. Jeff explains.
We're seeing with those customers that are really most successful in the cloud. They got in, they've been tracking cost and that, and they're looking beyond that value, but they're also evolving from that that ticket mentality or transactional mentality where I'm just a cost center and an order taker of the business. They're looking at their cloud environment, their infrastructure overall as a product, and that the business is really a consumer of that. And in order for them to really add value, they need to understand what the business is doing. What do they need? And so really starting to look at this the same way that a lot of the agile, software, is developed with that product mentality. They're really building those relationships. They're getting in and understanding not just, hey, I've got a system and you need to implement it. It's why do you need this, before they need it.
From ticket taker to product owner. Well, that fundamentally changes workload placement. Because ticket takers ask, where does the business want this? Product owners ask, where should this run to deliver maximum value? Well, Devang has a framework that he uses to answer that question.
So there are 4 levers that we always look at when building a business case for the client. The first lever is cost, which is what is this really, the investment that we are making into this. The second part is what is this investment driving for us money-wise? So meaning investing X dollars over time will result us in savings in the next 5 years of whatever. We are reducing our BAU run rate by investing money into it.
Cost and savings, the two sides of the financial equation.
The third lever is the risk lever, which is by investing into this, you're driving savings, but how much risk are you reducing in the mix? Simple example is you're sitting on legacy technology. This is technical debt sitting there in the organization over the last 10 years, 15 years, one outage, and all of a sudden you're sitting there on a ticking time bomb that you don't even know how to measure it, right? The goal at the end of the day is by driving this investment, you're reducing that risk.
Risk is real, even when it's hard to quantify.
And then the most important lever is the value lever. IT is always considered as a cost center, right? And in all of this, we want to figure out what is the value that we are building. And think about it from a time standpoint, meaning something that we are doing today takes us 30 days to do based on our processes. Can that be automated? Can we build value? Can we drive things in our organization that happens within seconds versus trying to wait for 30 days, right? That's where the value part comes in, where you're aligning yourself with the business. The business wants to go fast, and today IT is not able to go fast. And our goal is to help them compete with business with all the demands that business is throwing in front of them.
4 levers: cost, risk, value, time. That 30 days to 30 seconds transformation, that's business acceleration, not just infrastructure optimization. And the right placement for one workload might be completely wrong for another, even in the same organization. So where do you start? Well, Jeff emphasizes that it begins with the most basic question, one that should have been asked at the beginning.
The first question that I'd have, and with a lot of our clients today, especially those that may be looking at a large spend in the cloud, and that those are often results of a cloud-first mentality where they were in a rush to move. And there may have been a reason that they needed to close a data center or they wanted to avoid a refresh of hardware. They chose to move to the cloud, and they chose to move everything to the cloud. So a lot of times when we look at that or we're approached by a client, we'll ask, why you're in the cloud. What is it specifically about the cloud that you're trying to look at? Because that starts to help us understand the amount of money that they're spending there as we start to parse it apart and look at, the different things that they're spending it on, and what are the different workloads and applications that they have running up there. And that allows us to kind of walk through there and make some recommendations around, what things may not require the cloud or may not really get in a lot of benefit for the money that's there. And kind of going back to what you said, the value, is it really there?
Why are you in the cloud? Often there's no good answer beyond, we had a commitment. And once you examine workloads individually, patterns start to emerge.
There's some simple things, kind of low-hanging fruit that we can do around optimization. It's surprising a lot of our clients will have non-production environments that are running there and they don't turn them off. So there's simple things like that we can turn them off or help them schedule those things so that they can save the cost. But the bigger piece to value really starts with, why are you there? And then we can kind of build out a strategy, or at least analyze, the workloads that are up there.
Non-production environments burning money 24/7. That's symptomatic of a larger problem. Nobody's managing this as a portfolio. Devang explains what the assessment reveals about why costs spiraled.
All of this started with trying to fill an agreement that a client has or had with a particular public cloud provider. And it's usually a consumption-based agreement. X amount of volumetrics has to be filled in to drive the consumption that over a certain time frame that they have. And in that journey, clients have moved at a very fast pace to start to adapt to cloud. Now, as their workloads are running in there over time, over the last 3 to 5 years, they're starting to realize what they had envisioned, they are paying 2x, 3x of those costs. Because again, they took their legacy workloads and they migrated them as is to public cloud. They did not really take the advantage of moving to public cloud, which is you're starting to use more cloud native services. You're starting to SaaSify your applications. You are trying to create PaaS services that would allow you to build these services at values that the cloud provider is providing as part of you moving into those cloud platforms. Not all clients did that because, again, it was the pace that they were moving at. They just didn't have the bandwidth to do it, and also the cost to modernize these applications to make it more cloud native.
2 to 3 times projected costs. Because lift and shift without optimization means legacy architecture on premium infrastructure. Jeff explains that assessment goes deeper than just technical analysis. It can reveal organizational blind spots.
As Devang was talking, I was thinking about that question. What is the one thing that most CIOs or CTOs are a bit blind to? And it usually boils down to something as simple as their application portfolio, their CMDB. I can't tell you how many big companies that we walk into and we'll ask them about that, because everything that Devang talked about as far as, the technical debt, understanding what my application as far as what its tech stack is and what is it composed of, the security implications, the different types of data that's used in that. So having a data classification for that application, understanding the criticality of that application. I'll give you an example. We working in healthcare, in that there's a kind of a push to kind of catch up to the cloud. And so working with one client, they had one line of business and they moved just everything in. And as we were talking with them about it, they were like, okay, well, this application, it's a small departmental application, serves maybe 100 people, out of, one hospital. And when they moved it into the cloud, its costs, as near as they could tell, went up by like 10x. And there was no real reason to do that.
10 times the cost for a small departmental application. Because nobody asked, should we move this? They only asked, can we move this? So Jeff explains how this portfolio visibility problem gets worse when organizations merge or grow.
We're working with another, large healthcare system who's, recently merged in that, and the two organizations coming together, they don't really understand. They don't understand their entire portfolio, the merged portfolio, but they don't understand them individually either. And so that's one of those things that I think a lot of CIOs and CTOs are blind to, is what do they really have there? And in that merger situation, I've seen this also with a lot of our financial companies who are merging in that, is they end up with 3, 4, sometimes 5 applications that do relatively the exact same thing. And some of them are on-prem and some of them are in the cloud. And there's not any real reason as to why they're where they are.
3, 4, sometimes 5 applications doing the same thing. Some on-prem, some in cloud. No one knows why they're where they are. That's the assessment reality. You can't optimize what you can't see. But how do you actually fix workload placement at scale?
Over the last few years, we have seen clients ask us more and more about, can you come in and do a workload placement assessment for us that helps us define, ideally based on these application characteristics, where our workloads need to go, right? And out of that came sort of some more definitions of, okay, if we decide this goes to public cloud or this workload stays back on-prem, what is the right technology that we should run this workload on? Meaning, should we containerize it? Should we move it bare metal to a physical server? Should we think about any other transitionary technologies that are out there?
Not just cloud or on-prem, cloud on which platform, with which services, on-prem with which architecture, on which infrastructure. The decision tree branches fast. Well, Jeff explains how they turn assessment into execution.
There's two different contexts that we have them in. If we're getting ready to migrate an application, into the cloud, that we'll actually go in and do a rationalization of that application. Take a look at its technology stack, its criticality, and some of these other characteristics. We'll build out that scorecard with the client, and then we'll basically apply that to all their applications so they can get a quick look at, okay, here's all my applications and here's red, yellow, green, or, pass, fail. As far as cloud readiness, we can quickly categorize applications. You'll hear it talked about as 6 R's, whether we're rehosting, replatforming, retiring.
The 6 R's, from rehost all the way to retire.
And so that at an executive level, again, they can take a look at their portfolio and they can categorize those and understand a bit more about the scope of their issues and, what are the applications that would be ready today, maybe to move into the cloud, and those that maybe need a little bit of tinkering before they be ready. And others, it's like, are you kidding me? They're never going to the cloud.
Application rationalization, portfolio categorization, executive level visibility. That's strategic thinking, not just technical migration.
At the end of the day, it is people, process, and technology. Meaning people and processes are the first two key things that we want to focus on. And then technology is just binary, right? You're moving from one place to the other. That will happen. But the readiness of the first two parts is usually where organizations break down, and really helping clients solidify that people, process, and technology side of things is really that work that Jeff and team drives forward with really on that CCOE part and helping establish that governance body early on to drive the work forward.
There's that Cloud Center of Excellence structure again from Priority 3, because workload placement decisions cross organizational boundaries. Without cross-functional structure paired with actual authority, you're back to siloed decisions. And this is where strategic partnership matters. Devang explains how WWT's approach differs from traditional consulting.
I've been on both the sides, and it's so contrast between how one organization executes versus how Worldwide executes in terms of the work that we do for our clients. Coming from a larger consultancy, you are offshoring as much as possible. So there is timeline differences. There is sort of this cultural mix of things that clients have to think about. Again, because of time zone differences, it's always clients are up late or are up early in the morning to pick back up work from the offshore teams. Coming to Worldwide has been so refreshing from that standpoint to see us execute these deals to so much precision that clients just love the work that we do. It is a very onshore approach to what we do. We've got people at client sites building those relationships, making sure we are aligned with your business, making sure we are aligned with your technology teams, making sure we are bringing the best practices to how things should be executed rather than just punting it to offshore teams to do this work. From a worldwide standpoint, the depth and the breadth that we bring to our clients is far more reaching than any consultancy organization out there. If we want to pick an area of technology or people or process, trying to get that alignment with the client, what the client requirements are, it is just a perfect organization with the talent that we have internally to help bridge those gaps.
Onshore execution, people at client sites, depth across technology, across people and process. That's partnership through execution, not just consulting advice. Jeff emphasizes why that execution experience matters for workload placement specifically.
The technology, while not simple, is the easy part in comparison to the people in the process. So it's a place that you need to just start, and you need to challenge because of that breadth of experience that we have. It puts us in a unique position to really challenge our customers, not in a bad way, but just to challenge their thinking about their own business. We do see others in their own vertical industry, but we also see what's going on across those, and we can bring that to the table all the way to execution. My team may focus a lot on the strategy, but most of the people that I have on my team or that I work with, they're also people that have worked in the front line. They've had the hands on the keyboard. And so they understand not just best practices, but what really makes a difference for the client.
Strategy built on execution experience. Assessment leading to framework. Framework enabling decisions. Decisions backed by execution capacity. Without all those pieces, workload placement becomes shelfware. Both Jeff and Devang emphasized start with the why question and then build from there.
Generally, where we're going to start is with the strategy. And I know that seems like, 101. But a lot of times either they have a strategy and it's outdated, or in the one client I'm working with, healthcare again, because of the merger, their strategies they had two strategies and they weren't really well aligned. So that's the first place that we start with. And again, it goes back to that why. Why are you doing, why are you going into the cloud or anywhere? In this particular client, they have, they have large VMware installations and a lot of virtualization on-prem, but they also have cloud presence in that. So it's that conversation coming back to say, okay, what is your vision? What is that future state that you're looking for? And then, we come back and look at what your current state is, not just of your technology and that architecture, but also some of the more operational pieces of a operating model, and that around your security and operations and the skill of your organization and their readiness, to make that move to the cloud or wherever that you're going to put it in place.
Why are you in the cloud? Why would you move workloads back on-prem? Why does this workload need to be where it is? Those why questions force the value conversation that should have happened before that initial migration. But understand this, you don't need perfect answers to get started. Begin with the workloads that hurt most. Highest cost, biggest compliance concerns, worst performance. Prove the framework works there, then expand. Because the goal isn't perfection, it's building capability to make evidence-based placement decisions instead of momentum-based ones. Well, we opened with organizations spending millions in the cloud and finally asking, what are we getting for this? That's not a cloud problem, that's a value problem. What makes workload placement different is that it requires integrated capability across all four priorities in this research. Priority 1, establish visibility, understanding what you have and what it costs. You can't assess total cost of ownership without that foundation. Priority 2, build strategic partnerships, working with partners who execute across deployment models and bring expertise that you can't build on your own. Priority 3, created governance structure, that cloud center of excellence, bringing finance, operations, engineering, and business units together with actual authority. And then, of course, today's show, Priority 4, applies those capabilities to the hardest infrastructure question, which workloads belong where across your hybrid estate, based on actual value delivery, not vendor commitment or historical momentum. Well, here's what Jeff and Devang kept emphasizing. This isn't cloud versus on-prem. It's not even primarily about cost, though cost matters. It's about building organizational capability to make strategic placement decisions as workload requirements inevitably change, as technology options inevitably evolve, and as business needs continue to shift. Organizations that master this don't just optimize infrastructure costs, they transform infrastructure from a constraint into a strategic enabler, because they can move workloads to the right home based on value, not just based on where they've always been. I encourage you to dive into the full research paper, Strategic IT Value Creation. It walks through all four priorities and shows how they create integrated capability for delivering measurable business value. You're going to find the link in the description, along with WWT's frameworks for workload assessment and placement strategy. Because if you're recognizing these patterns, workload placement decisions needing reevaluation, infrastructure investments that, well, they're not really aligning with value delivery, or just the uncomfortable question of what are we actually getting? Start with the why questions. Why are these workloads where they are? Why would different placement deliver more value? Why now? Those questions begin the conversation that leads to better decisions. I'm Rob Boyd. Thank you so much for watching WWT Presents Research.